The fluorescent lights buzz overhead, flickering an uneven staccato as Marcus Bennett gripped his briefcase tighter. Stepping into the precinct lobby, the metallic clang of the swinging doors echoed behind him, a harsh counterpoint to the low hum of the air conditioning. He had been called in for a routine check. Nothing more than a paperwork clarification, but the weight in the room told him otherwise. Sergeant Nolan's eyes pinned him the instant he walked in. A smirk curled over pale, creased lips. "You're a bit too radical for your own good, Mr. Bennett," Nolan said, voice dripping with condescension. The words didn't just sting. They cut, leaving a cold, hollow echo in Marcus's chest. Marcus's fingers flexed against the handle of his briefcase. He had fought battles far bigger than this, yet the casual venom in Nolan's tone made him tremble with both rage and disbelief. Around them, officers exchanged quiet glances, a chorus of silent approval for the humiliation about to unfold. A sudden clatter of handcuffs snapped through the air, and a uniformed officer stepped forward. "Sir, we need you to come with us," he said, eyes darting nervously toward Nolan. Marcus's heart slammed against his ribs. His mind raced. He had done nothing wrong. Yet here, in this fluorescent-lit crucible, the full force of systemic bias bore down. I haven't done anything," he stammered. Nolan leaned closer, voice cold as steel. "We'll see about that." Marcus's pulse hammered his ears as the doors swung shut behind him, sealing him in a reality he knew would change everything. Marcus Bennett stepped into the precinct lobby, the fluorescent lights casting a sterile glow over the pale linoleum floor. The buzz above was relentless, like static in his ears, making him grit his teeth against a mounting unease. Every step he took toward the front desk seemed louder than it should, echoing across the cavernous room. Sergeant Nolan leaned back in his chair, eyes half-lidded but sharp, a smirk playing over his thin lips. Marcus paused. The man had that smug confidence only born of unchecked authority. "You're here for a routine check, Mr. Bennett?" Nolan's voice slid through the air like ice. "Yes," Marcus said, steady, masking the prickle of tension crawling along his spine. Nolan's smirk deepened. "I've heard you've been stirring things up lately." Marcus swallowed. "I advocate for reform. Yes, I work with communities to address injustices." "You've been a bit too radical for your own good," Nolan said, leaning forward. His tone was casual, almost conversational, but there was a lethal edge beneath the words. Marcus stiffened. He had faced prejudice before, but the casual venom here made the room seem smaller, suffocating. Around them, officers lingered, their silence a chorus of complicity. A uniformed officer stepped forward, holding handcuffs with a hesitant grip. "Sir, we need you to come with us." Marcus's hand tightened on his briefcase. "I haven't done anything wrong," he said. Nolan's eyes narrowed. "We'll see about that." The clang of the swinging doors behind him was final, a metallic punctuation that made his chest tighten. He was led into a small interrogation room. The walls were pale gray, fluorescent lights overhead, a single camera blinking in the corner. Nolan followed, his footsteps measured, deliberate. "Sit," Nolan commanded. Marcus seated himself, keeping his movements deliberate. The room smelled faintly of disinfectant and old coffee, a scent that clung to the edges of his memory like a warning. Nolan sat across from him, hands steepled. "Let's cut to the chase. Your activism, your speeches, some would say you cross a line." "I speak truth," Marcus said, calm, measured. "I advocate for communities denied justice." Nolan's lips tightened. "You call it truth. Some call it incitement." Marcus felt the words hit, like cold stones. He had navigated hostile bureaucracy before, but this was a direct, personalized accusation. He met Nolan's gaze evenly. "Incitement to justice?" he asked, voice steady but sharp. A pause stretched between them, taut and brittle. Then Nolan leaned forward, voice dropping. "Some people in authority believe you push things too far. Maybe you've forgotten your place." Marcus's jaw tightened. He had rehearsed responses in his mind 1,000 times, but the reality was always sharper. Around them, the clock ticked, each second a drumbeat echoing the injustice of power misused. "Are you going to charge me or just humiliate me for sport?" Marcus asked. Nolan smiled thinly. "We'll see how the investigation goes." For now, hold still. Two officers approached, a quiet tension in their stance. Marcus's pulse hammered as they secured his hands behind him. The clink of the metal cuffs sounded far too loud. "You're being detained for questioning," one officer said, avoiding Nolan's eyes. Marcus's mind raced. He had faced systemic bias before, but the precision, the casual cruelty of this moment struck differently. He was not a nameless statistic this time. He was Marcus Bennett, a man with reputation, a career, and a lifetime of advocacy, and yet he was at the mercy of one officer's prejudiced perception. He was led through the narrow hallways, fluorescent lights reflecting off polished floors. Every step echoed his dread. Officers whispered in passing. Their glances carried judgment, curiosity, or apathy. Each step magnified his vulnerability. Nolan followed silently, the smirk never leaving his face. It was a mask of power, a reminder of who held control. Marcus could feel it pressing against him like the walls themselves. They arrived at a small holding area. Marcus was instructed to wait. He seated himself on the hard bench, the metal biting through his trousers. His hands itched, not just for freedom, but for the words, the strategies, the tools to turn this moment into justice. Minutes stretched like hours. Marcus's mind traced paths through legal procedures, media exposure, community support, all potential shields against the weight of bias pressing down. Nolan's voice cut through the tension. "Remember, Mr. Bennett, not everyone gets the benefit of the doubt." Marcus's jaw set. He nodded slightly, the movement almost imperceptible, but it carried the weight of defiance. He was not broken. He would survive this, and make sure the world knew why. As the door clicked behind Nolan, shutting him out of the room, Marcus leaned back. His breath came in controlled bursts. One thought dominated. Power misused could be exposed. Prejudice could be challenged. And those who underestimated him would learn the consequences. The room was silent, except for the hum of fluorescent lights. Marcus clenched his fists. This was only the beginning. The interrogation room was smaller than Marcus remembered. The walls a dull gray that seemed to close in with each passing second. The fluorescent light overhead hummed like an anxious heartbeat. The camera in the corner blinked at him, silent and accusing, as if recording not just his movements, but the tension in his chest, the tightening in his shoulders, the flicker of defiance in his eyes. Nolan entered, clipboard in hand, his expression carefully neutral, the kind of neutrality that screamed judgment. He pulled out the chair opposite Marcus and sat with deliberate slowness, knees brushing the table. "Let's start simple," Nolan said, flipping open the clipboard. "Where were you last Thursday evening?" Marcus met his gaze evenly. "I was at the community center. You can check the logs. I conducted a meeting with several neighborhood leaders about housing inequity." Nolan's lips curved into a faint, condescending smile. "Right. But someone claims you were at a rally downtown, leading chants. Care to clarify?" "I wasn't there," Marcus said. "I focus on lawful advocacy. That's what I do." Nolan leaned forward, voice dropping, a predator in repose. "You know, Marcus, people hear your speeches. They read your posts online. You stir feelings, sometimes anger. Some people say it borders on radicalism." Marcus's chest tightened. He kept his hands folded on the table, steadying the tremor that threatened to betray him. If seeking justice for marginalized communities is radical, then yes, call me that. But I've never incited violence. Nolan's eyes glinted, scanning him like he was a specimen under a microscope. "Words are powerful, Marcus. Some people interpret them in ways you might not anticipate." "I take responsibility for my words," Marcus replied, voice calm but firm. "But I won't be punished for advocating truth." Nolan smirked. "Truth is subjective, isn't it?" The comment stung, not because it was clever, but because it was a reminder of the power imbalance. Marcus had spent years fighting for clarity, for justice, for systemic reform. Here, in this small gray room, it felt like the system itself had twisted reality into a weapon against him. A pause stretched. The faint hum of the fluorescent light filled the silence. Then Nolan's voice cut through, sharper now. "Do you know why people like you make me nervous?" Marcus raised an eyebrow, caution lacing his tone. Why? You challenge authority, Nolan said, leaning back. You speak openly, question policies, organize protests. And you think you can do it without consequences. Some people don't like that. Marcus's jaw tightened. Are you threatening me, Sergeant? Nolan chuckled softly, a sound that didn't reach his eyes. Not a threat, a cautionary observation. Two officers appeared at the door, standing silently, their presence amplifying the tension. Marcus felt the weight of their collective gaze, the silent suggestion that they too were part of this theater, complicit by their mere presence. You'll find, Nolan continued, that not everyone sees activism the way you do. Some see trouble, some see disruption, some see danger. I see people denied basic rights, Marcus said steadily, and I act to change that. I don't see danger, I see necessity. The room shifted subtly. Air seemed heavier, the fluorescent light harsher. Nolan leaned forward again, resting his forearms on the table. His voice softened, almost conversational, but the undertone remained venomous. And yet, here you are, in my precinct, handcuffed, answering questions. Do you feel uncomfortable? Marcus didn't flinch. I feel aware that bias can wear the mask of procedure. I feel aware that power can be weaponized. I feel aware that your assumptions do not define me. Nolan's lips twitched. He scribbled something on his clipboard, then looked up, eyes narrowing. You speak well. Too well. People like you can sway crowds, influence opinions, maybe even change the system. And that's dangerous. I am dangerous only to injustice, Marcus replied. His voice was calm, almost serene. But the words carried the weight of every experience he had lived. The long nights advocating, the repeated dismissals, the microaggressions, and the open hostility. A long silence settled. Marcus felt it stretch, pressing against his ribcage. He knew the next question could pivot the interrogation into something far more personal, far more invasive. You have connections, Nolan said suddenly, leaning in. Influence. People who listen. People who act. Do you ever think about what could happen if that influence turned against someone? Marcus's fingers flexed on the table, a quiet gesture of restrained energy. I think about accountability, he said. I think about fairness. I think about justice. Nolan smirked again. Fairness. Justice. Words people cling to when convenient. But what about loyalty? What about law? What about order? Marcus's eyes didn't waver. Order without justice is tyranny. Loyalty to injustice is complicity. And law without fairness is oppression. The words hung between them like smoke in a still room. The officers at the door shifted, a slight rustle of uniforms. Marcus felt the weight of their silent judgment. He knew that every word, every gesture, every measured breath was being scrutinized, cataloged, interpreted. You're clever, Nolan said finally, leaning back in his chair. Too clever for your own good. Marcus allowed himself a small, almost imperceptible smile. Perhaps, or maybe I'm just prepared. Nolan's smirk faltered, if only for a moment. He scribbled something else on the clipboard, then closed it with a deliberate snap. We'll continue this later. For now, think about what I said. Consider how far you're willing to push. Marcus remained seated, hands folded, heart hammering. Yet a spark of resolve flared within him. He would not break. Not here. Not in this room. As Nolan left, the door clicking shut, Marcus exhaled slowly, leaning back in a hard chair. The hum of fluorescent light filled the silence, and he let his mind run through contingencies, lawyers, media, community allies, documentation. Every path a shield, every connection a weapon. This interrogation was not just about him. It was about the system he fought against. Marcus stepped out of the precinct with the heavy weight of the interrogation still pressing on his shoulders. The cold December wind hit him, as if the city itself was testing his resolve. The streets were busy. Cars honked. Pedestrians hustled past. But Marcus felt an invisible barrier separating him from the ordinary rhythm of life. Every glance, every sideways stare seemed amplified. He was now a man in the crosshairs of a system he had spent his life challenging. He dialed his lawyer, Karen Wallace, a seasoned civil rights attorney who had defended activists before. Her voice, calm yet assertive, greeted him like a lifeline. "Marcus," she said immediately, "I've read the initial report. This is troubling." "They're painting me as some radical troublemaker," he said, voice tight but steady. "Nolan's manipulating everything, twisting facts." Karen's sigh was audible, a mixture of frustration and calculation. "We'll fight it, but bureaucracy is a labyrinth. Precincts, internal affairs, clerks, courts, it's designed to drain you." "I know," Marcus admitted, "but I've faced worse. I can't let them get away with this." "First," Karen said, "document everything. Emails, calls, witness accounts. Then we start filing motions. I'll handle the precinct. You focus on public statements, careful phrasing, nothing that can be twisted." Marcus nodded, imagining the hours he'd spend in phone calls, meetings, and paperwork. The fight had shifted from a small gray room under fluorescent lights to a sprawling battlefield of law, policy, and public perception. At the courthouse, the air smelled of aged wood and polished brass. The marble floors gleamed under the winter sunlight streaming through tall windows. Marcus met with a court clerk, a young woman with tight curls and tired eyes. "Mr. Bennett," she said softly, "I hope you understand the process can be slow." "I do," Marcus replied. "But slow doesn't mean powerless. We're documenting every delay." As he spoke, Nolan's presence loomed indirectly through the files, the memos, and the whispered conversations between officers. Every step felt calculated, every pause and procedure deliberate. Marcus noted each detail, cataloged each microaggression, each subtle hint of prejudice. The system was like a river, flowing quietly, yet capable of sweeping away those unprepared. Later, in a small office lined with legal texts, Marcus met Karen again. "They're trying to use ambiguity," she explained. "Statements you made months ago are being framed as incendiary. Context removed, tone altered. It's classic gaslighting through bureaucracy." Marcus ran a hand through his hair. "It's exhausting but predictable." Karen leaned forward. "It's exhausting for a reason, to make you doubt yourself, to make you yield. But you won't." He nodded. "I won't. But we need to be meticulous. Every witness, every timeline, every recorded conversation. If they're twisting reality, we document the truth." Days bled into nights. Marcus spent hours compiling evidence, reviewing transcripts, coordinating with colleagues and community members. The legal labyrinth stretched endlessly, forms, signatures, filings, each a gatekeeping measure, designed to drain patience and morale. But Marcus navigated it with precision. Each document was a stone in the foundation of justice. He was building. One evening, he met with a young community leader, Naomi Fields, in her modest office adorned with posters of civil rights icons. "They're trying to scare people off," Naomi said, voice tight. "Some of our members are nervous. The precinct's power is intimidating." Marcus leaned back in his chair, hands clasped. "Intimidation is temporary. Fear doesn't last if backed by truth and solidarity. We document, we witness, we speak. That's how change is forced." Naomi nodded slowly. "I hope you're right. It feels like the whole system is against us. Then we let the system see what we can do," Marcus said. "Not just a fight on paper, but the courage to persist. That's the lesson here." At the precinct, Marcus observed small interactions. The clerks avoiding eye contact, officers exchanging quiet glances, Nolan's shadow lingering in hallways. Each detail became part of a larger tapestry of systemic bias. Marcus realized the labyrinth wasn't just legal. It was social, psychological, institutional. Back in his apartment, he spread documents across the kitchen table. Evidence, timestamps, witness statements, media clips, all pieces of a puzzle that would eventually expose not just a wrongful accusation, but the patterns of abuse embedded in the system. His phone buzzed. Karen's name flashed on the screen. "Update," she said immediately. "Internal Affairs is reviewing your complaint. They're moving slowly, but they're moving. We've also lined up a preliminary media piece, carefully worded. Nothing accusatory, only factual." Marcus exhaled, a brief relief passing through him. "Good. That visibility helps. Karen's tone softened. It does. But remember, this process will test you. They will push, question, manipulate. Keep your focus. Keep meticulous records. And keep your composure. He glanced at the documents, then at the window overlooking the city skyline. Lights twinkled like distant stars, indifferent to his struggle. But Marcus drew strength from the connections he had forged, the allies he had, and the principles that had guided his life. The labyrinth was vast, but he had a map, truth, documentation, persistence, and support. And somewhere, within the intricate corridors of bureaucracy, he knew Sergeant Nolan's assumptions and prejudices would be challenged. Marcus leaned back, eyes closing briefly. Exhaustion tugged at him, but determination held firmer. He was not just fighting an isolated incident. He was challenging a pattern, a structure that allowed unchecked authority and prejudice to flourish. In that moment, he understood the stakes were larger than personal vindication. They were communal, societal. The labyrinth was a test, not of his legal knowledge alone, but of resilience, strategy, and unwavering commitment to justice. When he reopened his eyes, Marcus picked up the phone again. "Karen, ESA." The morning light cut through Marcus's apartment blinds in sharp slats, illuminating a wall cluttered with notes, witness statements, and printed screenshots from social media. His phone buzzed relentlessly. Texts, emails, notifications. Every message carried a ripple of tension. A news alert flashed across the screen. Activists attained at precinct. Allegations of radical activity. The headline was careful, neutral in tone, but Marcus knew how selective phrasing could distort perception. He tapped the screen, eyes narrowing. Karen Wallace's voice came through on a video call. "Marcus, the story is spreading faster than we anticipated. Social media is polarized. Some support you. Others echo the precinct's narrative. We need a controlled statement." Marcus ran a hand through his hair, tension coiling in his chest. "I'll release one. Brief, factual. No exaggeration. No emotion. Just truth." Karen nodded. "Exactly. You can't let them frame your voice. The narrative is a battlefield. But remember, transparency protects you. Avoid confrontation in public forums for now." He drafted the statement meticulously. Date, time, location, purpose of the precinct visit, and his peaceful advocacy record. Every word was deliberate, calculated to withstand scrutiny and manipulation. Later, he met with a small group of allies at a coffee shop, a warm refuge against the winter chill. Naomi Field sipped her latte, eyes scanning the street through the frosted window. "They're calling you radical in every forum," she said quietly. "Some people online even question whether your work is legitimate." Marcus sighed. "That's expected. The precinct knows the power of labels. Radical, troublemaker, agitator. Each word erodes credibility in the public eye. We counter with facts, not fury." Naomi nodded. "I just hate that fear spreads faster than truth." Marcus's gaze was steady, unwavering. "Then we make truth louder. Every statement, every verified report, every interview. It's a shield against distortion." The media began contacting him, reporters seeking sound bites. Marcus responded cautiously. Each answer was rehearsed but authentic, calm yet assertive. "Marcus Bennett, why were you at the precinct?" A reporter asked during a brief outside interview. "I was there to clarify a routine inquiry," Marcus said. "There was no wrongdoing on my part. I am committed to advocating for fairness and transparency in every community I serve." Another reporter pressed. "Do you feel targeted because of your activism?" Marcus paused, measured, then replied, "Bias exists. Sometimes subtle, sometimes overt. The important thing is accountability. Through documentation, legal channels, and persistent advocacy. That's what I'm doing." The cameras clicked, microphones recorded, and the word spread quickly across airwaves and social media feeds. Each phrase was a small victory, a counterbalance to the false framing. Back in his apartment, Marcus scrolled through comments. Supportive voices stood alongside hostile ones, the digital cacophony amplifying tension. He paused on a comment calling him dangerous, and another praising his courage. He felt a familiar pang of exhaustion, but tempered it with resolve. Public scrutiny was a tool, potentially harmful, yet powerful if navigated correctly. Later that evening, Marcus met with Karen to review next steps. She spread printed clips across the conference table, news stories, social media screenshots, email chains. "See this?" Karen said, tapping a headline. "It's subtle framing. Notice how they omit context, exaggerate minor details. This is why documentation is critical." Marcus nodded, scanning the articles. Every omission, every tweak, it's a bias pattern. Predictable, but damaging if unaddressed. Karen leaned back. Public perception can swing both ways. We maintain credibility. Fact-based statements, transparency, measured engagement. No emotional escalation. We're building an unassailable record. Marcus's phone vibrated again. A call from a local community leader. "Marcus," the voice said urgently, "people are organizing a vigil outside the precinct. They want to show support. But the media's already there." He exhaled, running a hand across his face. "Tell them to remain peaceful. We cannot allow any misstep to overshadow the truth. Their solidarity matters, but it must be disciplined." The vigil unfolded under gray skies. Citizens, activists, and allies gathered, holding candles and signs demanding accountability. Marcus observed from a distance, feeling the pulse of collective concern. Camera lenses recorded, reporters jotted notes, and the precinct walls seemed both protective and oppressive simultaneously. A journalist approached him, voice low. "Marcus, any reaction to Sergeant Nolan's statements? He claims you're too radical." Marcus met the gaze evenly. "I advocate for justice, not disruption. Labels do not define my actions. Facts do, and facts will prevail." The journalist nodded, scribbling quickly. Marcus could see the story morphing already, but he was patient. Every controlled statement was a building block, a way to navigate the labyrinthine core of public opinion. Later that night, alone in his apartment, Marcus allowed himself a rare pause. The glow of the city outside the window reflected in his eyes. The public scrutiny, the media attention, and the whispered conversations in precinct halls, all of it pressed against him. Yet there was clarity, too. Exposure brought accountability. Transparency built trust. The battle for perception was just as critical as the legal battle, perhaps even more so. Marcus picked up his phone, scrolling through supportive messages. Naomi's voice echoed in his mind. Fear spreads faster than truth. He pressed his thumb against the screen, typing a brief note to community members. "Stay strong. Stay factual. Stay visible. Truth is our shield." The city hummed outside. Cars honked. Streetlights flickered. Distant sirens punctuated the night. Marcus leaned back, hands clasped, eyes steady. The scrutiny was relentless, but he had navigated darker storms. The public gaze, like the press of fluorescent lights in the precinct, could be oppressive, but also illuminating. He closed his eyes for a moment, imagining the narrative taking shape. One built on truth, resilience, and unwavering commitment to justice. The labyrinth of public opinion was vast, but it was not insurmountable. And in that moment, Marcus Bennett understood that exposure, while intimidating, could become a weapon against systemic bias, if wielded with patience, precision, and integrity. Marcus sat in his apartment late into the night, the city lights spilling across the hardwood floor like shards of fractured glass. He stared at the wall where a timeline of his activism was pinned. Photos, newspaper clippings, handwritten notes, reminders of battles fought and small victories earned. Each memory was a layer of resilience, a testament to years of challenging systemic injustice. The phone rang, breaking the quiet. Naomi's voice came through, weary but resolute. "Marcus, I've been speaking with community elders," she said. "They're worried. Your past experiences, the arrests, the intimidation, it's all surfacing again in conversations. People are scared, unsure." Marcus leaned back, letting the chair support his weight. It's predictable. Patterns repeat. The same fear tactics, the same misrepresentation. I've seen it before. But we persist, and that's what counts. Naomi's sigh was audible. Still, it's unsettling to see how deeply entrenched these biases are. Even your colleagues sometimes hesitate to speak out. He nodded, eyes scanning the clippings on the wall. There was a photograph of him at a community rally 10 years ago, holding a megaphone, a crowd of diverse faces around him. Another showed him testifying before a city council committee on housing inequality. Each image carried tension, a reminder that he had navigated hostility before and survived. "Marcus," Naomi said softly, "do you ever feel tired? That maybe the system will always push back, no matter how careful you are?" He paused, letting the weight of truth settle. "Tired? Yes. Frustrated? Constantly. But defeated? Never. Each setback is a lesson, a way to anticipate the next challenge. You don't fight bias by hiding from it. You fight it by being present, persistent, and unyielding." Later, Marcus met with an old mentor, Reverend James Caldwell, in a small community church filled with a faint scent of incense and aged wood. The Reverend's eyes, lined with decades of experience, studied him carefully. "You've been through the fire, Marcus," Caldwell said, voice gravelly but steady. "And yet here you are, facing again." Marcus nodded. "It's the same pattern, different faces. Bias, assumption, microaggression, they've been constants. Only the tactics evolve." Caldwell leaned forward. "Do you fear this new scrutiny? The public attention, the legal labyrinth?" Marcus shook his head. "I respect the challenge, Reverend. But fear? No. Fear paralyzes. We use strategy, evidence, alliances. That's how you survive the system and expose it." Caldwell's gaze softened. "And yet, even with strategy, it exacts a toll. You must guard yourself, Marcus, not just for the cause, but for your own spirit." Marcus allowed a brief, reflective pause. "I know, each confrontation leaves a mark, but the alternative, silence, inaction, is far worse. Every lesson from my past shapes how I navigate the present." As he left the church, the winter air bit at his cheeks. The streets were quieter now. The hum of the city softened under a thin layer of fog. He walked slowly, recalling another encounter from years ago, a wrongful arrest, a night in a cold holding cell, and the fear and humiliation he had endured. The memory was sharp, vivid. The fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, the officer's dismissive sneer, the silence of bystanders. He shivered, but not from cold. He had learned then that the system's mechanisms of power relied not just on overt oppression, but on subtle, cumulative psychological pressure. Each unjust interaction was a thread in a larger web designed to disorient, intimidate, and isolate. At home, he spread out old journals, flipping through lines written in moments of despair and resolve. One entry read, "Justice is patient. Persistence is necessary. The system underestimates those who endure." His phone buzzed again. Karen Wallace, coordinating legal filings and media statements. Even amid personal reflection, the labyrinth demanded his attention. He jotted notes, responded to emails, and scheduled calls. The past and present intertwined. Lessons learned fueled strategy, insight shaped communication, and historical awareness sharpened his instincts. That evening, Naomi visited, carrying a folder of community reports. "They're rallying behind you," she said, placing the folder on the table. "Even those hesitant before are now voicing support. Your history commands respect, Marcus. People know you've been consistent, principled, unyielding." Marcus glanced at the folder, scanning names, statements, and endorsements. "It's humbling," he said, "and necessary. Our strength lies in collective memory as much as individual action." Naomi hesitated, then asked, "Do you ever think no one understands what he's up against?" Marcus smiled faintly, a mix of irony and inevitability. "I doubt it. Most people don't anticipate the depth of experience they're challenging. They mistake fear for respect, power for control. But the truth, documented, persistent, visible, will outlast their assumptions." They reviewed strategy late into the night, the city beyond the window quiet but alert, like a witness. Each plan, each step forward, was anchored in past experience. Marcus's life had been shaped by systemic bias and personal encounters with injustice, giving him insight into both the mechanics of oppression and the methods of resistance. He paused, looking at a photograph of his younger self at a civil rights rally. The energy, the fear, the courage, every emotion was a thread connecting then to now. Nolan's Microaggressions, the The wrongful accusations and the public scrutiny were all part of a continuum, a repeating pattern he was now equipped to navigate with precision. History informs strategy, Marcus said quietly to Naomi. The past is a map. The present is the battlefield. And every action, every documented fact, every witness statement is ammunition in this fight. Naomi nodded, eyes reflective. And your presence here, now, gives others courage. Not just legal guidance, but moral clarity. The park was quiet that afternoon, the winter sun low in the sky, casting long shadows across the snow-speckled paths. Marcus walked with deliberate calm, his coat buttoned high against the cold. Each step was measured, as if pacing not just the path beneath him, but the tension coiling in anticipation. Today, he would see Nolan outside the precinct, a controlled, public setting where power dynamics could shift subtly yet decisively. Nolan approached from the opposite path, clipboard tucked under one arm, sunglasses masking his gaze. He spotted Marcus and straightened, a practiced smirk curling across his lips. Marcus Bennett, Nolan said, voice carrying easily in the crisp air. Fancy meeting you here. Marcus's eyes met his, steady, unwavering. Sergeant Nolan, I could say the same. Nolan's smirk deepened. I hear your reputation precedes you, always in the public eye, stirring discussions, challenging authority. It's impressive in a way, and concerning in another. Marcus's jaw tightened. I challenge injustice, not authority. There's a difference. One protects people, the other protects the system. Which side are you on? Nolan's gaze flicked away, briefly scanning the park. A few joggers passed, oblivious to the tension threading the space between them. You know, Marcus, some people think your activism pushes too far. It disrupts order. I disrupt only to restore balance, Marcus said calmly. You misunderstand what's necessary when systems fail communities. Nolan's smirk faltered for a fraction of a second, quickly replaced by a mask of authority. I operate within the law. You sometimes skirts edges. Perhaps you don't understand the consequences of that. I understand consequences, Marcus said evenly, which is why I document everything, act transparently, and ensure my advocacy stays within both ethical and legal bounds. They walked in parallel along the snow-lined path, the tension thick in the chilled air. Marcus observed small details, the glint of Nolan's watch, the slight tremor in his hands, the habitual adjustments of his clipboard. Authority often relied on subtle displays of confidence. Cracks were revealing. Funny, Nolan continued, his tone casual yet sharp. I always thought people like you were harmless idealists. But it seems influential, effective, and dangerous are closer to the truth. I've never seen influence as dangerous, Marcus replied. Only accountability, only clarity, only exposing patterns of injustice. A brief pause hung between them, punctuated by the distant sound of children laughing at a playground, a reminder of the world outside this confrontation. Marcus's presence, calm yet firm, exerted its own quiet pressure, highlighting the disparity between ethical power and positional power. Nolan leaned slightly closer, voice lowering. Do you ever worry, Marcus, that one day someone will outmaneuver you? That influence can't protect you forever? Marcus held his gaze. Influence isn't protection. It's responsibility. Responsibility is why I act with transparency and integrity. And it's why patterns of abuse eventually unravel, no matter how confident the perpetrator. Nolan's smirk faded, replaced by a hard line of frustration. You think your truth can undo institutional authority? That it can hold people accountable? I don't think, Marcus said softly but firmly. I know. Institutions rely on people. People make mistakes. People lie. People abuse power. And when truth is documented, witnessed, and persistent, even authority bends under scrutiny. The wind shifted, rustling through the bare branches above. Marcus's words seemed to echo, not just to the park, but into the latent spaces of power Nolan represented. Careful, Marcus, Nolan said, tone dropping slightly, a warning wrapped in civility. You're treading dangerous ground. Marcus smiled faintly, a mixture of irony and conviction. I walk where justice requires me to, Sergeant, and I do so without fear. The confrontation drew subtle attention from passers-by, a jogger slowing to glance, a couple watching curiously from a nearby bench. Marcus remained composed, aware that visibility could be a shield. Public scrutiny was now part of the battlefield. "You've changed," Nolan said, voice lower, almost grudgingly. "You were more naive before. 10 years ago, you'd have faltered." "I've learned," Marcus replied. "Experience teaches clarity, patience, and strategic persistence. It shows which battles are essential and which are distractions." They stopped near a frozen fountain, the water beneath the thin ice reflecting the winter sky. Marcus turned to face Nolan fully, standing tall. "I don't underestimate you, Sergeant, but I know the patterns. I know the tactics. And I know that arrogance often precedes downfall." Nolan's jaw tightened. For a fleeting moment, the confident facade slipped, revealing the uncertainty Marcus had long observed in microaggressions and subtle interactions. "You're confident," Nolan said, voice flat, perhaps overly so. "I'm prepared," Marcus replied. "Confidence without preparation is arrogance. Preparation without principles is useless. I have both." A silence followed, heavier than any words. Marcus could sense Nolan calculating, measuring, questioning the assumptions that had guided his treatment of Marcus until now. Small details, the tone of voice, the careful phrasing, the documented facts, undermined the power he had wielded casually in the past. Then Nolan shifted, stepping back, a subtle acknowledgement of the moral and intellectual ground Marcus now occupied. You become someone I didn't anticipate," he admitted quietly. "Perhaps too far beyond my expectations." Marcus's lips curled faintly. "I warned you before. Influence isn't threat. It's accountability. And accountability is impartial. It doesn't yield to fear or prejudice." Nolan's gaze lingered on Marcus, a mixture of resentment, realization, and something almost like fear. He adjusted his coat, visibly gathering composure, then nodded curtly. "We'll see how this unfolds. For now," Marcus allowed a pause, letting the tension linger before responding. "For now, we continue ensuring truth is visible. That's all that matters." Nolan stepped away, leaving Marcus standing near the frozen fountain. The jogger resumed their run, oblivious of the collision of principles that had just occurred. Marcus exhaled, a controlled breath, letting resolve settle into his shoulders. The office smelled faintly of polished wood and printer toner, a sterile calm masking the tension Marcus had carried for weeks. He entered, briefcase in hand, greeted by the quiet hum of computers and the low murmur of assistants typing reports. The space, orderly and efficient, felt almost surreal compared to the chaos of the past month. The precinct confrontations, the public scrutiny, and the labyrinthine legal processes. Karen Wallace met him at the door, eyes sharp, clipboard in hand. "Marcus, we confirmed the scheduling for internal affairs and media statements. But there's something else, something you need to be aware of before Nolan finds out." Marcus frowned, setting his briefcase down. "Go on." "Your position as chair of the Truth Commission," Karen said carefully, "hasn't been widely publicized yet, but it's leaking. Internal channels have started noticing, and some media outlets are piecing it together. Nolan will learn soon, if he hasn't already." Marcus's pulse quickened. This was the moment where past assumptions and present authority would collide. The very person who had humiliated him, wielded power casually, and underestimated his influence, would now confront an inconvenient truth. Karen continued, "You need to decide how to reveal it. Publicly, strategically, or let it surface organically. Each choice has implications." Marcus nodded slowly, mind racing. "We'll manage the timing. But the key is clarity. No sensationalism. Just facts. My role is transparency, not theatrics." Later that day, he returned to the precinct. Not for confrontation, but for official filings. Nolan was there, clipboard under arm, eyes scanning Marcus with that familiar mixture of condescension and self-assurance. "Marcus Bennett," Nolan said, voice flat. "I hear you're climbing ladders I didn't anticipate." Marcus's lips curved slightly. "Sergeant Nolan, it seems you've underestimated me." Nolan's gaze narrowed. I don't underestimate anyone, but influenced authority, they have their limits. Perhaps you'll discover that. Marcus exhaled slowly, letting the calm in his voice counterbalance Nolan's tension. I understand limits. I also understand responsibility. My position with the Truth Commission requires transparency, accountability, and impartiality. The same principles I apply to my advocacy. Nolan stiffened, the casual arrogance faltering. Truth Commission? He repeated, voice low, incredulous. Yes, Marcus said evenly. I chair the commission. We investigate systemic injustices, review institutional failures, and recommend corrective measures. Essentially, the same structures you operate within now fall under scrutiny, including conduct like yours. Nolan's jaw tightened. The familiar smirk vanished, replaced by a flicker of unease. You have oversight? Marcus met his gaze directly. Oversight, accountability, transparency, all standard components of ethical governance. And now, you are part of what is being examined. A silence stretched, tense and loaded. Marcus could sense Nolan calculating, tracing the implications of the revelation. Every microaggression, every dismissive glance, every wrongful assumption now bore the weight of formal scrutiny. You chair this, Nolan said finally, voice tight. I didn't realize. Perhaps you never considered the consequences of casual prejudice, Marcus replied. His tone was calm, almost gentle, but carried the undeniable weight of truth. Underestimation can be costly. Nolan's hands clenched around his clipboard. The authoritative facade he had wielded effortlessly in the precinct now seemed fragile, exposed. Marcus could see the uncertainty, the internal reckoning of someone confronted with the accountability they had ignored. Karen, observing from the sidelines, whispered, He's realizing the reach you have, Marcus. Carefully, let him process it. Marcus nodded subtly. I am not here to humiliate Sergeant Nolan. I am here to expose clarity, fairness, and the consequences of biased assumptions. That is the role of truth. The corridor outside seemed suddenly quieter. The hum of fluorescent lights, the soft click of shoes on linoleum, all underscored the tension between past arrogance and present responsibility. Marcus understood the irony. Every unjust interaction now mirrored under scrutiny. Nolan's voice broke the silence. Quieter now, edged with caution. And all the times I misjudged, mischaracterized you, it's under review? Marcus met him evenly. Every action leaves a record. Every decision documented. Every assumption testable against fact. That is accountability. That is transparency. Nolan swallowed, his confidence eroding. For the first time, Marcus observed the human cost of hubris. The way unchecked power crumbles when confronted by principled authority. Karen stepped forward. Marcus will schedule a formal release to the public and internal channels. Carefully phrased, factual, documented. The narrative will be controlled, ensuring clarity and preventing misinterpretation. Marcus nodded. Good. Transparency must precede spectacle. Truth must lead. Later, in a private office, Marcus drafted the statement detailing his role and responsibilities, emphasizing ethical oversight and systemic review. Each sentence was deliberate, precise, leaving no room for distortion. As he finalized the draft, his phone buzzed with a message from Naomi. It's going viral already. People are talking. Marcus smiled faintly. The revelation had already begun its ripple effect. The public would see his position not as a political maneuver, but as a responsibility earned through years of consistent advocacy, integrity, and resilience. The next day, Nolan received an internal memo, official notification that Marcus Bennett's commission role involved review of precinct conduct, including procedural adherence and accountability standards. He read it silently, the words sinking in. The casual power he had wielded was now subject to oversight. Every microaggression, every wrongful accusation, every presumption would be examined. The realization struck a subtle panic, a recognition of the misjudgment he had made. Marcus, aware of the ripple, allowed patience to guide him. Public confrontation was unnecessary. The system itself, when properly informed and documented, would reveal truth and enforce consequences. Karen whispered as they observed from a distance. Nolan knows. He understands the stakes now. Our work begins in earnest. Marcus nodded, eyes steady. It's not about vengeance. It's about principles. Accountability is not personal. It's structural. And when structures fail, truth must intervene. In the quiet of the office, Marcus reflected on the morning sun filtered through the blinds, casting long, rigid lines across the polished floors of the precinct. Marcus walked through the halls, papers and files in hand, each step deliberate. Today, the subtle power dynamics that had governed his interactions with Nolan and the precinct would face scrutiny. The weight of systemic oversight had shifted, and Marcus was prepared to see it unfold. Karen Wallace met him outside the Internal Affairs office, her expression measured, clipboard tucked under her arm. Marcus, the review has begun. Witnesses have been called, reports compiled. Everything is in motion. Marcus nodded, a quiet resolve threading his shoulders. Good. The goal isn't punishment. It's transparency and correction. That's what accountability looks like. Inside the room, officers sat in tense clusters, the air heavy with expectation. Nolan was there, clipboard in hand, attempting composure, though the tension in his jaw betrayed him. He glanced at Marcus briefly, eyes narrowing, as if measuring the distance between reputation and responsibility. An internal affairs officer began the session, voice formal and procedural. We're here to review allegations of biased treatment, misjudgment, and inappropriate conduct. Mr. Bennett, Sergeant Nolan, all statements will be recorded and documented. Marcus sat upright, hands folded, absorbing the hum of activity around him. This was a culmination of weeks of careful documentation, public scrutiny, and strategic navigation of bureaucratic processes. Every microaggression, every unjust interaction, every mischaracterization would now be formally assessed. Nolan shifted uncomfortably. I understand, he said, voice tight, attempting neutrality. I will answer questions as best I can. Marcus remained composed, meeting the officer's gaze. I expect honesty, he said simply. The goal here is clarity, not theatrics. The questioning began. Witnesses recounted interactions, citing microaggressions, dismissive comments, and procedural inconsistencies. Marcus observed each response, each hesitation from Nolan, cataloging discrepancies and omissions. Patterns emerged, small threads of bias that, when woven together, painted a larger picture. You accuse Mr. Bennett of radical behavior without substantive evidence, one witness noted. Your comments created fear and influenced colleague perceptions. Nolan's eyes flickered, a subtle defensive twitch. I acted on what I observed. My concerns were procedural. Marcus leaned forward slightly. Procedural concerns must be documented accurately. Influence through biased perception is not procedure, it's assumption. An assumption, unchecked, harms both individuals and institutions. The room was silent for a moment, the tension thick. The officers, witnesses, and internal affairs personnel watched carefully. The weight of truth, methodically presented, began to shift the balance of authority. Nolan swallowed, adjusting his clipboard. I see that my assumptions may have been misinformed. I did not intend harm, but I recognize the impact. Marcus nodded subtly. Recognition is the first step. Accountability follows. Transparency must be sustained. Every action has consequences, intended or not. A second witness, a clerk who had observed interactions firsthand, added. There were repeated dismissals, subtle comments implying radicalism, and documentation selectively highlighted. Karen Wallace interjected, her tone firm. This is exactly why thorough documentation matters. Facts, timeline, and patterns allow institutions to correct behavior and prevent future bias. Mr. Bennett has maintained meticulous records, and they demonstrate systemic issues, not isolated incidents. Nolan's shoulders tensed. For the first time, the authority he had wielded casually felt fragile under the scrutiny of measured truth. His smirk was gone, replaced by a rigid composure, each word now deliberate, cautious. Marcus remained calm, silent at intervals, letting the unfolding accountability speak louder than any confrontation he could engineer. Each procedural note, each documented interaction, each witness testimony built an irrefutable narrative. The sun rose pale and muted over the city, casting a silvery glow across the courthouse steps. Marcus adjusted his coat, hand steady, as he walked toward the building. Today was more than procedural victory. It was a culmination of months of careful documentation, public scrutiny, and strategic persistence. Karen Wallace flanked him, her presence steady, confident. "This is the moment, Marcus," she said, not for personal triumph, but for clarity and precedent. Every witness, every record, every statement converges here. Marcus exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of anticipation, yet grounded in preparation. "It's not about revenge," he said quietly. "It's about demonstrating that accountability works when pursued with evidence, patience, and principle." Inside, the courthouse buzzed with activity. Journalists lined the hallways, cameras clicking, microphones extended, capturing every interaction. Community members, allies, and colleagues filled the benches, their presence a testament to solidarity. The hearing began. The judge, impartial yet attentive, addressed the room. "We are convened to review findings from internal investigations regarding officer conduct and systemic bias allegations. All parties will present testimony and documentation." Marcus observed Nolan across the room, clipboard clutched tightly, eyes wary. Authority had been undermined by oversight, and every detail now carried weight. The dynamic had shifted. The casual power once wielded by arrogance and assumption now contended with evidence, principle, and public accountability. Karen presented the compiled documentation meticulously. Witness statements, timelines, procedural deviations, public statements, and media coverage. Each piece reinforced a pattern of bias and misjudgment. Marcus watched as Nolan's composure wavered, subtle but undeniable. A key witness, a precinct clerk, described the repeated microaggressions and dismissive behaviors. Sergeant Nolan repeatedly framed Mr. Bennett's actions as radical without evidence. These actions influenced colleagues' perceptions and affected procedural outcomes. Nolan's face tightened, his jaw a rigid line. I believed I was acting responsibly," he said, voice restrained. "I didn't intend bias. I did not perceive harm." Marcus leaned forward slightly. Intent does not negate impact. Documented actions, cumulative patterns, and systemic influence do. Accountability is impartial. It addresses effect, not motive. The judge nodded, absorbing each statement with measured attention. Public scrutiny had amplified the impact of the evidence, ensuring transparency not just for those present, but for the wider community observing through media coverage. Outside, social media buzzed with updates. Supporters shared clips of Marcus's statements, while journalists summarized the documented findings. Visibility had become a tool of accountability, not distraction. Karen turned to Marcus quietly. "Your preparation and composure are setting a precedent. Nolan cannot manipulate perception now. Everything is on record." Marcus exhaled, a calm determination threading his chest. "Documentation is power," he said softly, "and transparency amplifies it." As testimony concluded, the judge addressed the room. Based on submitted evidence, witness accounts, and procedural review, it is clear that systemic bias and misjudgment occurred. Recommendations include formal reprimand, additional oversight, and policy revision to prevent recurrence. All parties are reminded that accountability is continuous, not episodic. Nolan's shoulders slumped slightly. For the first time, his casual confidence had been replaced by recognition, subtle, unspoken acknowledgement of misjudgment and oversight. Marcus observed, calm yet firm, knowing that vindication was not about humiliation but structural correction. The morning sun broke through heavy clouds, casting a muted golden light over the city. Marcus walked to the plaza near City Hall, the crisp winter air carrying a sense of calm after weeks of tension, confrontation, and scrutiny. Today was quieter, reflective, a moment to absorb the consequences of accountability and resilience. Karen Wallace joined him, her expression measured but relieved. "It's done, Marcus. The formal proceedings, the oversight measures, the policy revisions, they're all in place. Transparency has prevailed." Marcus nodded, exhaling slowly. It's more than just procedure. It's precedent. Every future case, every officer, every encounter is now part of a system that cannot ignore accountability. But change is continuous. It requires vigilance, not complacency. They entered the Truth Commission offices, a space now bustling with quiet efficiency. Staff reviewed reports, drafted recommendations, and coordinated with community organizations. Marcus moved through familiar corridors, observing a network of individuals committed to systemic fairness. Naomi met him in the main conference room, holding a folder of community feedback and recent developments. "People are responding positively," she said, eyes bright with cautious optimism. The public, the precinct, and community leaders all recognize the outcome as a step forward. Your role isn't just symbolic. It's influential. Marcus leaned against the table, studying the documents. Influence without principle is dangerous. Influence with principle is transformative. That distinction guides every action we take. A call came through from an internal affairs officer, confirming that Nolan had been formally reprimanded, placed under additional oversight, and enrolled in a comprehensive bias and procedural ethics program. The systemic correction was real, enforceable, and irreversible. Marcus allowed himself a moment of satisfaction, not personal triumph, but structural integrity. Each documented microaggression, each witness statement, each confrontation had built a foundation for accountability that would extend far beyond individual vindication. Later, Marcus attended a small gathering with community members and allies in a local civic center. The atmosphere was subdued yet warm, a collective recognition of persistence, resilience, and moral clarity. Naomi raised a glass of water in a quiet toast to Marcus for showing us that persistence, documentation, and principle matter, that accountability is possible. Marcus smiled faintly, accepting the sentiment without ego. "Not to me," he said, voice steady, "but to the principles we uphold, to those whose voices are unheard, to systems that must serve justice, not assumption." A young activist approached him, eyes wide. "Mr. Bennett, how did you stay so composed through everything? The confrontation, the scrutiny, Nolan's tactics." Marcus considered this, then replied quietly but firmly. "Composure comes from preparation and principle. Every step, every word, every decision was guided by truth, transparency, and documentation. When you act from those foundations, fear loses its grip." Later, in his office, Marcus reviewed the final reports of the Truth Commission. The recommendations were clear: improved oversight, mandatory ethical training, systematic review of complaints, and continuous evaluation of procedural compliance. The structures that once enabled unchecked bias were now constrained by documented accountability. Karen joined him, leaning over a report. "This is a turning point, not just for Nolan or the precinct, but for the broader system. Enforcement now has teeth. Bias, subtle or overt, cannot go unnoticed." Marcus nodded. "It's progress, but vigilance remains essential. Systems adapt and assumptions persist. Our responsibility is to ensure principles remain central and that integrity guides action." A quiet knock came at the door. It was Nolan, hesitant, subdued, a stark contrast to the confident posture he once carried. He stepped inside, hands clasped nervously. "Marcus," Nolan said, voice low, almost tentative. I wanted to acknowledge the process. The reprimand, the oversight, it's fair. I understand now the impact of my actions, the assumptions I made, the harm caused. I am committed to learning and correcting my behavior." Marcus studied him carefully, measuring sincerity. "Acknowledgement is a first step," he said. "True accountability comes from sustained action, reflection, and adherence to principle. Change is demonstrated over time, not words alone." Nolan exhaled, a subtle weight lifting from his shoulders. "I understand. I'll comply fully with the oversight and training. And I'll ensure my colleagues understand the importance of fairness and transparency." Marcus nodded. "Good. That's what responsibility looks like. Actions, not assumptions, define integrity." As Nolan left the office, Marcus allowed himself a moment of reflection. The tension, the scrutiny, the confrontations, they had culminated not in personal triumph, but in systemic correction. Every effort, meticulous and deliberate, had contributed to structural integrity and public accountability. Later that evening, Marcus returned home, the city skyline glowing against a dusky sky. He stood by the window, the soft hum of streetlights and distant traffic filling the quiet space. The emotional weight of the journey lingered, the exhaustion, the stress, the constant vigilance. But alongside it came clarity, resolution, and purpose. Naomi joined him, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "You've earned this moment, Marcus. Not because of victory, but because of integrity, resilience, and relentless commitment to principle." Marcus smiled faintly. "It's never about me. Every step, every confrontation, every documented fact. It's about reinforcing justice, transparency, and accountability for the system itself, and for those whose voices are marginalized or ignored." They sat together in quiet